You back on?
Back on? Okay. Still buffering my end.
Yeah, mine's still buffering too.
Trust me, guys, you're live.
Yeah, I've got YouTube on my phone and it's not playing.
Yes, I'm playing on my phone and it's buffering. Giving time for people to think about it.
Yeah.
Any questions?
Yeah, I've got one. Are we live, Chris?
Yes.
Can they hear us?
Yes, you are.
We're live.
Yes.
Well,
they can be entertained.
Well, okay, I've got my... That's
what you've got up there?
Yep.
I've got, this is what I can see.
I'd suggest you close that window and you'll open it again, you'll see a live one there.
Ah, so it's proceeding. Yep. Okay.
So is the talk finished?
Yep.
Okay.
In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen.
So it's actually done?
Yes.
Ah, okay.
Okay, all right. Sorry. We're obviously not professional podcasters. So welcome back, everybody. Well, welcome to us. Okay. Thanks. Thank you to Dean also. Those videos are awesome that he takes. And he's been working with us actually from the start of these talks. He was producing high-def videos of the talks when we were actually in the church. And now he's working with Father Nick D, filming his presentations and editing them and putting them together, and they're really great. So thank you, Dean. Okay, I've only got one question so far, so send in your questions. Are you ready, Father Nicholas, for this question?
Well, hang on a sec. Firstly, while it's buffering, that's not the end of my talk. And I, in fact, it's nearly the end of what I posed, the question I posed, but then I went on to a second question, which was raised by a parishioner. And perhaps if this thing doesn't stop buffering, I can sort of repeat what I said on the thing that's recorded. Because we're only halfway through it, effectively, in terms of questions that I posed. There are two questions I addressed.
They give credence to sign.
So, what I'll do, if you just hang on for a couple of seconds, I can send my own computer there, on my laptop. I'll switch that off and switch it back on again and see if that works. Okay, just give me 2 seconds.
Yep. Chris, are you there? So did people see that in the whole talk or not? This is what I don't understand.
They will give credence to sign. Now I switched it off, switched it back on again, and it repeats the process. So I was just looking quickly at my notes. I'll finish off what I was talking about on the recorded session. I was, just before it went buffering, I explained that it was necessary to use that language amongst youth, which they have, as I believe in, as I believe to be true. Okay, that's bit. The last bit of that question was, the other reason that we use the language of nature this time is because that is the only way that we can possibly negate false accusations made by atheists to deceive Christians. So unless we argue against atheists using scientific type of language, we will get nowhere. They'll just absolutely dismiss us, dismiss any Christian who tries to argue against atheists using conventional theology. That's the point. And the only way you can argue is counter their arguments using the same mode of discussion. So that was the essence of that particular question. Okay. Here, the second question was actually posed by Sasha from Hobart. And he asked this question: how can a loving God send people to hell for all eternity? This is sort of, in a sense, an extension of Father Nick's talk, because he went into the loving God bit very, very well. And so my short answer to that was that God does not send anybody to hell. It's actually the opposite. People send God to hell for all eternity. I'll repeat that again. God sends nobody to hell. People send God to hell. So now we'll look at that a little bit. Every single person ever born, from Adam and Eve through to us now, to the last person, every person is God's child by grace. God does not possess human passions, meaning that he's neither angry, I think Father Nicholas mentioned this, nor is he vindictive. God is love, and that's it, only love. It's not an attribute, it's part of his very essence. Okay, now God wants every single person to be with him in heaven. Look, I just got to mention that I'm here using this iPad, which is a bit crazy. It's got the camera stuck on my left edge. And so when I'm looking at the screen, I'm sort of not looking at the camera. And if I'm looking at the edge, I just it's disjointing. So if I'm not looking at you, it's because I am looking at you. So anyhow, back to here. God wants everyone to be with him in heaven. The problem is that not everyone wants to be with him. This applies to all true atheists and to evil people in general. There's a lot of atheists are not really atheists, they simply don't think deeply. Now, God gave us, as Father Nicholas mentioned, unconditional free will. And because it's unconditional, God can't force us to do what he wants. That means he can't force us to love him. Especially, he can't force those who hate him to love him. And therefore, if they don't love him, God cannot grab those people and drag them towards him and say, nevertheless, because I love you, you're going to stay with me in heaven forever. You imagine spending eternity with someone that you hate. So if that was the case, people who are dragged by force to heaven to be with God, that would be their form of hell in heaven. It'd be torment itself. But after the second coming in particular, there are only two places in the other world. Heaven is where God resides. And the other place is where God does not reside. but I'll add the word visibly. Hell is a place where God still resides, but you can't see him. So those people who choose to go where there is no God, where they don't see God, that is what we call hell. Now, here's what really happens. God, in the Holy Trinity, God can't suffer, but that God-man Jesus can in his humanity. And because Jesus, God in total, but Jesus loves all people unconditionally, Jesus, wants to be with his children, wherever they are. And that includes hell. And so the problem is that those who hate him, if they saw him in hell there with them, they would then suffer even more. They're suffering already because they're made in God's image and God's not there. But then when they do see him and they hate him, their suffering would increase dramatically. So God is there invisibly. They can't see him. He is there with his children. And again, as Father was pointed out, it's a one-to-one relationship. So God relates to every one of us individually. And so God relates to, in hell, he relates to each of his children in hell individually. He's there, one-to-one. And he's observing his children suffering. And so he too co-suffers with them. But because his love is pure, it's not polluted by any passions, when he sees his child suffering, his own co-suffering is greater than the child who's suffering. That's not the end of the story. It goes deeper than that. Say there were 1 million people in hell. It's probably much more. But say there were 1 million. That means that God, Jesus, will be suffering 1 million times more than had it been a one-to-one scenario. So that's and he does that out of love for us, for people. And yet he loves us so much, and what happens? He's persecuted just forever, eternally by the world. And I think it was yesterday, the day before, again, Father Nicholas and I spoke briefly on this, and he reminded me that Archimandrit Safuni, who was a disciple of, I think, Saint Silouan, you might correct me if I do. And Saint Silouan, he lived on Mount Athos, and I think he died in the 1930s. Anyhow, Saint Safroni said that if there was only one person in hell, then God would spend eternity in hell with him, just for one person. And so when you got multitudes of people rejecting God, and he is there, still there, co-suffering with them like 1 million times. The same as when he suffered for all of us on the cross. One person, and he didn't suffer as divine God, as if divine God gave him extra power to cope with the suffering. He suffered as a human being. And so this whole notion that God sends people to hell is back to front. People rejected God, they don't want to be with him, so there's no other option. If they don't want to be with him in heaven, they go to the other joint, hell. By choice, they go there, they choose to go there. And so God follows them, and he, as a loving father, suffers. That was essentially the answer to the second question about why God sends people to hell. So what I wanted to do here was every now and again to have, what do you call it? It'll be called Science and Faith Q&A. And so today was the first attempt at Science and Faith Q&A. And then so I'll then continue to do my other lectures in dribs and drabs. And then we'll have another Q&A, and that'll be part 2, and another one, part 3. And so we'll sort of work our way through. So stuff that people ask and we can't answer here necessarily, then Andrew can write these down, pass them on to me, and I'll just sort of collate them and have another Q&A session further down the track so that you can zero in and have a look at that. That's the intention that I have in mind anyhow. And I'll just mention also that all this stuff that I'm talking about, that's still part of the very first line of the creed. I believe one God, the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth, and all things visible and invisible. And I'm only now, almost, at the stage where he's going to be making heaven and earth. So all this stuff that I've been doing till now has just been largely preamble. It's leading up to the point of creation, and whatever I describe scientifically is established science. It's not interpretation by anybody. It's how science of the day is, and I will use that and speak around that, and it'll, I think, hopefully it'll become clear how things unfold. And then I will try, it'll be my entire effort to try to explain how God also made the invisible things using scientific terminology. So that's basically it. That's my Q&A session for today. So, and Andrea, you mentioned there's a question.
Yeah, I've got a couple. What approach would you suggest in regards to educating children about the laws of nature and the law of God?
Very good. It's a brilliant one. In fact, several weeks ago, when Father Nick and I were doing a 1.5 hour Q&A for Canberra, we sort of touched on that, and I'll essentially repeat that. It's the same answer. Things should happen in two fundamental stages. The first stage is when children are young. In particular, we know that their little brains develop from the time they're born, particularly to age 3. The brains develop very, very rapidly. And so what the children experience in that part of their life through their senses, whether mother gives them a hug, or mother is impatient, or father's impatient, or father loves them, or all the bodily senses, they actually form the structure of the brain. And how the brain develops, that influences the soul. So the first bit is it's so crucial for parents to teach their little ones, when they are receptive, to love God. And this is where lives of saints play a big, big role. When parents talk, maybe read a little bit of life of saints, clearly they can't be too technical. So the parents should simply use the life of a saint as a theme, and they can build that theme up with a little bit of fiction, if you like. And so that the child, using their little imagination, can develop an exciting relationship with God, where they love Him, they love the saints. So, and so I mentioned, I guess, at 3 years of age, this sort of peaks, but the brain still continues to develop at a fairly rapid rate for another few years in particular. And so as they get older, 8, 9, 10 years of age, they're still extremely receptive to discovering God by through the saints. And this is why the bulk of a person's soul develops in this early phase of their life. And what the problem we have in the 20th century is that life is really difficult. Typically, mother and father have to work to make ends meet. They come home and they're tired, and they will use the TV as an outlet. Plonk the child in front of TV, or give them some toys to play, and the parents do their job of preparing food and cleaning and cooking, whatever they do. But meanwhile, the child misses out. If the parents take time out to spend with the child to teach them to love God, that's already, I would say, 80% of the battle won up there and then. What the stuff that I've been talking about is beyond that. So they love God initially, and then there's a sort of a period where they live, going to church, and then sort of it's part of their life. When they hit mid-teens, so I've seen this as a priest already, say by age 15, things start to get a bit out of control. Firstly, the kids, they think they're mature, but they're not mature. They've got the emotions of children still, but the intellect apparently tells them they're little adults. And so they are then approaching the age of rebellion. And so between, say, roughly 15 to about 25, when they go to high school, end of high school, early uni, that's when they start to believe that they are really intellectually advanced compared to all the kids that came in previous generations, and even their parents who tend to be sort of a bit on the pleb side. And so this is where, at that age, they are extremely receptive to the world that they encounter around them. And this is very much so, say, I don't know, 18, 19, 20 years of age, where the world now is really cool. It thinks by itself, it doesn't need God, it sort of creates its own morals and ethics and everything else. And so it's like sheep following the herd. It's the herd mentality. And so had these Christian youth not had an upbringing earlier in their childhood to love God, they then become very receptive to the world that disdains God, who hates God, who rejects God, thinking it's a cool way of living, the intellectual man. And so it's that group that we need to address. And that's the group that thinks that whatever it is that they learn, whether it's the arts or philosophy or psychology or sociology or whatever they do, that they think that now that's the real world, and they are very receptive to this real world, which is based on fake atheism pretending to be scientific. There's a big difference there. So the two phases, loving God, an interim phase, and then the deceptive phase. And so it's in this realm, in the deceptive phase, where clergy in particular, earlier back it was mum and dad, now it's clergy in particular who have a role to play. If they can communicate with their youth using not conventional theology, that comes later. So it's not that we're replacing conventional theology with this new stuff. It's a new form of addressing the needs of youth that has to be addressed using their language, a language that they trust. That's why I'm doing this stuff. So it's in addition to else happens. So I think I answered the question, and there might have been a second part.
No, that's it. No, you answered that. Okay. Did we evolve from apes?
You know what? I could give you a short answer, and that's no. That's no. But I think, 15, 20 years ago, earlier back, that was a big deal. If you ask somebody whether the person was Christian, whether the person was an atheist, if you say, when you talk about science and religion, what does it mean? And they would always answer, it's really believing in God or believing in evolution. They were the only two. Evolution was the only representative of science. Now, it really isn't an issue at all. Every now and again you will read scientific papers, not on evolution. They might be discussing, I don't know, the consciousness, how it came about, or the human brain or the mind, or it could be cosmology or whatever. And when they try to come up with an explanation, then they'll throw in the word evolution has developed that. And then they go on. But nobody sort of that I now know, and I do tons of reading, that evolution's ever sort of discussed in any significant way. But having said that, I really think I should have a session which will go for, I don't know, 15 minutes, 20 minutes to give it justice. And I'll just add this bit. Back in 2014, I gave a lecture at La Trobe University to PhD students in philosophy. And they thought that I was going to be fundamentally defending the church against evolution. And I remember I just then pointed out to them, I said, I wear two hats. One hat is a priest, the other one's an engineer. And I said, as a priest, it's not my role to tell God how to create anything. So if God wanted to create evolution, that's fine. It's none of my business. So I don't actually have a theological objection as such, although there is one. That's a philosophical, theological. I won't touch that now, I can later. What I pointed out to these people, I said, my objection is that from my perspective as an engineer, evolution fails big time. And as an engineer, not as a priest. I think that's the extent that I'll mention now. And beat down the track, I might sort of explain why. But I'll add this bit, that I am not one of those priests who advocates that the universe is 6,000 years old or thereabouts. Right? I'm a scientist in my heart. Genuine science is a gift from God, it's part of God, as I mentioned. So there can't be conflict there. So that's, I think, the essence. I can touch on that later on, as I said.
Yeah, I think something to look forward to. One of your talks in the future. Basically, we have. We've got one more. We've got like a couple of minutes. I don't think it's actually quite an interesting statement, I guess, about atheists and non-believers and this hatred towards Christ and God. And the question is, do you think that they hate the essence of Christ and God, or do they hate their own kind of image of what they prescribe that Christ or God is? Does that make sense?
Okay. About a month ago, I caught a tail end of it. It might have been a YouTube talk where a guy called Hugh Ross, who is an astrophysicist, is a professor in that area, and he's now Christian. He converted to Christianity through cosmology, and he's very active in this role. He was going to give a talk at one university, I just can't remember where, fairly recently, and he was going to include the word God in his description of the universe. And the university said, no, that can't happen. So he said, okay, if I replace the word God with a causal agent, is that okay? They said, yes, that's fine. It's crazy. It's a hatred of God. And in fact, the concept of a creator of the universe as such is not anathema. I don't particularly like it because it implies God, but the issue is God. Take God out of the equation and I'll show you something. Just give me 2 seconds. The book I'm looking at, trying to find, is under my iPad. This is a serious book. The way I see it, back to front on it, it's called A Big Bang in a Little Room. It's not a theistic thing, but this woman astrophysicist goes around interviewing a lot of people about the possibility of creating a universe in a laboratory. And in principle, that can be done. So these are atheistic scientists describing, like, you've heard of the Hadron Collider that we've got that's such around a 27 kilometre ring under Francia, and there's that protons around, and your light speed will crash, and there is particles that things happen. And the idea is that potentially, at least, in theory, they could create a teeny weeny little black hole, and that hole, again in principle, can explode into a universe. The point I'm making here is that the concept of a creator, that we can even create a universe in a laboratory, is again feasible technically. There's no objection to that. So it's not creator per se. God's the issue. And so atheism literally would not exist if God didn't exist. And then if all the other versions of creation were developed. So atheists need God. Otherwise their own very existence is meaningless. But the real people, the agnostics, they are the ones who say we're prepared to accept that issue and demonstrate that we haven't seen any evidence. That's a real person, a real genuine one. The other ones are just they're a bunch of crooks. So, okay.
Okay. Fantastic. Well, I think they're the main points. So I think, well, thank you very much, both Father Nicks. So both of you will be back in 2 weeks' time. We're going to continue on this series, yeah? God willing?
That's the idea.
Okay.
Yes.
Great.
All right.
Yep.
So we'll have to say adieu to you and you and you.
We're going to say a prayer.
Yes. Okay. It is truly meet to bless the earth, Theotokos, ever blessed and most pure, the mother of our God, more honorable than the cherubim and beyond comparable glorious than the seraphim. Without corruption, they gave his birth to God the Word. True Theotokos.
Amen. All right. Good night.
Okay.